Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and today I'm sharing with you a conversation with Jennifer Tadjedin and Karen Callahan, who are the co-founders of the Heartwood Collective, which provides end-of-life education and peace of mind planning. So stay tuned and you'll hear all about the Heartwood Collective from Jen and Karen. And make sure you've subscribed to this channel using the button down below, and also subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you happen to listen to the podcast. That'll be very helpful. And go to eoluniversity.com/support if you're willing and able to make a small financial contribution that will help keep this podcast and the YouTube channel on the air. So thanks in advance if you choose to do that. And we'll move on now with today's interview. Today, I'm very happy to welcome two guests to the podcast, Jennifer Tadjedin and Karen Callahan. Jen is a death doula and certified senior advisor who brings both personal insight and professional dedication to her end-of-life work. She is a co-founder of the Heartwood Collective, and through one-on-one doula support and educational planning workshops, she works to normalize conversations about mortality and help individuals and families face this natural stage of life with openness and confidence. And Karen had an earlier career helping to build StoryCorps, the National Oral History Project. She loves learning about the paths and experiences that shape one's life and legacy, and has now turned her focus to helping people talk about and plan for the end of their life. She is a co-founder of the Heartwood Collective and completed her end-of-life doula training through the Peaceful Presence Project and recently became a certified senior advisor. And you can learn more about Jen and Karen's work at their website, theheartwoodcollective.com. So welcome, Jen, and welcome, Karen.
Thanks for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to hear more about the work that the two of you are doing together. But I was hoping you'd start out by just telling us a little bit more, each of you, about your own stories, what drew you to the work, and then even how you ended up coming to work together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you again, Karen, for having us. We're both thrilled to be here. We love talking about this sort of stuff, so we'll always welcome the opportunity. I am about 3 years into end of life death work. I was in advertising for a long time, and the first thing that really drew me into this work was volunteer work that I did in hospice, and just becoming truly overwhelmed by the idea that we could help people have such a better death. And, I think hospice does an amazing job of that. But there's this whole other world of people who can support one another at the end of life, whether it be the person who is actually dying or supporting the family. And I just became, I was also looking for a career change. And so it just kind of, the timing of it all worked out for me. And I started doing some research and looked into the idea of becoming a death doula, and was just very taken by the whole idea and the type of support that one provides. And so did some research, found a course, and I registered for that class. Wasn't actually starting until the fall. And as life would have it, my uncle, with whom I was very close, he didn't have any children of his own. And so my sister and I were, sort of his surrogate kids. He got very sick and died fairly quickly of lung cancer. And I ended up, being with him and caring for him for that last like 10 days of his life. And it was such a seminal moment for me, both personally and then as the beginning of embarking on this career. It just really, I felt so in my element and so empowered in that space that I just knew that this was the work I should be doing. And so I took the course, got my certification, and hung my proverbial shingle in a website. And then fast forward probably about 9 months, I met Karen 9 months later, and we met down at Endwell down in Southern California, their annual conference. And I'm going to let Karen tell the story of how we kind of came together, but that's my journey into this space.
I love that feeling you described of knowing that this is where you belong. This is the work that you're meant to do. And isn't it so interesting how so many of us came from different places, starting out with different careers on different paths, and then ended up being called here to work at the end of life. But it's just such a powerful passion that we all carry.
It is.
Yeah, similar to Jen, I worked in public radio at StoryCorps, and then I spent 15 years in tech in HR, kind of like still connected to the human side of thing, but I had always had this interest of around end of life. I read Being Mortal, and just like intellectually was really interested in it. I think also, my dad was in not great health for most of my life, so it was always just like a baseline concern of like how was this all gonna go down kind of. And while I was still working in tech, I lost both of my parents. I lost my dad somewhat expectedly, kind of over the course of many years of decline. And then less than 2 years later, I lost my mom really suddenly, a fairly quick illness. And during that time, I was, very well supported by my company. I had a month of bereavement leave. My sister and I were kind of, of course, tasked with taking care of everything. And I just still couldn't believe how horrible that process was. Like, and we got along, we were able to like delegate our responsibilities, and it was just so tedious and, burdensome during a time of grief and trauma because everything had happened so quickly. So I was thinking then, like, how can we do this better? Um, Took some time off of work to see if I could make a change. And I really resisted it for a while because I was just thinking, like, I don't know what my place is here. I don't know. I'm interested in it, but I don't really know where I fit or what the work is. And so decided to take some time just to do some research and talk to people. And I found I was very interested in a lot of folks in my peer group. I lost both my parents by the time I was 40, but most of my friends were just starting to deal with, supporting their aging parents, trying to have these conversations unsuccessfully. Oftentimes people don't live by their parents anymore. I feel like a lot of us had moved away from home. And so navigating that from afar. And during this process, I also took a death doula course with Peaceful Presence, just because I wanted the foundation to understand more what was happening in this space. Not sure that the one-on-one work was what was the draw for me. I volunteered in hospice just to get some more exposure. And then, like Jen said, went to Endwell as a way to be just, what else is happening here? And I'd actually seen Jen's name because she was also from Portland. We're both in Portland, and they like beforehand put a list of all the participants out, and I was like, I should find that person and talk to them. So totally stalked her as a participant, and suggested that we get coffee when we're back in town. And from there, just we really felt, I think from that first meeting, just like really aligned on some of the stuff that we cared about and thought was important, which was talking to people like our generation, folks who are thinking about their parents, oftentimes still in, very classic sandwich generation, dealing with their kids at home. This is all very overwhelming, but they know that there's things to be thinking about that's not just I have a will, or they feel like there's things I need to do to prepare, and I'm not sure what those things are. And I'm curious and I want to learn more. So we started talking about, doing education around that. How can we help people just start to understand what the types of things are to think about, how to approach these conversations with your parents who are maybe, a little bit more, the situation feels a little bit more urgent. Um, and that's kind of how it started for us. And I think we both just decided like, let's try it. It felt easier together, instead of going out on our own because we were both still fairly new, but we felt confident that we had enough conversations with people that this was an important thing and something people needed. So we were like, let's just put a stake in the ground and build out a workshop. And see how it goes, and we'll learn from there. And we did our first one in the spring of 2024. I
Four.
was like, what year is it? Um, so that's been I feel like what the work that I really love doing, and we'll talk more about what those workshops are. But also, like you mentioned, we both got certified. We both became certified senior advisors. I do a lot of volunteering with End of Life Choices Oregon, which is the group that helps folks who are interested in medical aid and dying. Um, we are also both looking into doing Medicare navigation, so helping folks figure out how what their options are as they age into Medicare. It feels like there's so many of these kind of adjacent topics just to help people feel more supported as they age and as they get closer to the end of life.
Hmm. That's really it's great to hear your story. And I'm a big believer in collaboration and synchronicity and just the synergy of coming together to work together. And so I love hearing how the two of you, like the momentum really builds when you're with another person who's like-minded and you bring your creativity together. And I think we need more and more of that in this movement. I think that's how we're actually going to bring change about, is by coming together and working together. And I love that you met at Endwell, which is one of those great networking hubs where people come from all over the country, and a great place to connect and find people to work with.
Yeah, it's an incredible conference and so well produced. Like it's so well curated, and I feel like even when I haven't been able to go but watch the topics online, it's really incredible.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry, Karen. I just wanted to say one last thing. I couldn't agree with you more. As far as like the collaboration and just, when you connect with somebody too, it really can be so transformative. And I feel like when I met Karen, I was like, I kind of have this little idea. And then the germ of the idea became so much grander than I ever envisioned because of the work that Karen and I have done together. And it really is. It's extremely powerful.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I was thinking about, even generationally, my generation, baby boomers, we were some of the pioneers in getting all these ideas started and conversations started. But now we're actually we're the people who need to be doing our own planning. And we actually need support from younger generations. So it really excites me to see that there are younger people who want to be part of the movement and who are out there doing the education and carrying on some of the work that those of us who are getting older, we can't be as much out in the field anymore as we used to be. But it's exciting to me that younger people are taking up the mantle and doing the work.
Definitely.
So tell us a little bit more about your mission for Heartwood Collective, and what you see as your goals and what you'd like to bring into the world.
Yeah. So, we have, I think, we could kind of put into buckets the mission we have, but there is one very large overarching sort of umbrella mission, which is to really just try and help to normalize the conversation around death and mortality, and just the fact that we are all aging, we will all die. It is not something that's not going to happen to anybody. And we need to just be more comfortable talking about it, because the more comfort we have in the space, the more we are able to engage in the necessary things that have to be done prior to somebody's death, or again, like Karen was saying, after somebody dies, and helping to close out affairs. And if you've had conversations and you know what somebody wants to have done with their body or how they might want to be celebrated, it just allows you the space to be able to just sit with your grief and not have this additional stress. And so just kind of bringing this transformation of death being more a part of life and not this thing that is just not to be discussed, not to be looked at, we want to bring it into the fold. And for generations, I think, when you talk about the older generation, and now thankfully there is a younger generation that is interested in this kind of work. But one of the things that, particularly in the United States, we do typically move away from our elders. We don't have these multi-generational homes like there are in other countries, and sometimes there are, but a lot of the time you live in one state, 3,000 miles away from your aging parents, and therefore your children or their grandchildren aren't seeing that natural process. And so it becomes this thing that is just very fearful and the unknown. And so we're trying to just get that back into more of the everyday conversation.
Hmm. I love that. And you're so right. That's exactly where we need to begin because we have to get more comfortable, more familiar with death and dying as a natural part of life before we can help people do more of their planning and make better decisions about the end of life. First, we have to restore that comfort.
Yeah, and the way that we try to achieve that is helping people just, because it's just like so overwhelming. So we try to help people just, here are some small tangible things. Let's give, we kind of, in some ways, like the normalization piece, especially in the workshops, which are these small group 4-part sessions. The normalization comes over time, right? Like every class, people just get a little bit more comfortable. And the way that we kind of get them into that is by talking about tangible things. It's just like, here's a small thing that like you can do, or to think about, or just takes a really big topic and makes it more manageable chunks. And then it helps, just chip away at that comfort. Just so that they don't, it doesn't, it's just like opening the door a little bit, or opening the window, or whatever the right metaphor is, just giving folks a little bit of an insight to start to have that feeling.
Yeah, that's something interesting that I observed in the past is that some people were more comfortable talking about maybe planning their funeral or writing their own obituary than they were talking about medical issues and what would they want medically at the end of life when they're actually dying, because that thought was so frightening to them. But, picking a song for a funeral service, that seemed, as you said, something a little bit more tangible, that was less intimidating, and they could actually imagine it as I'm planning some sort of my last party and not really think about the fact that, oh, but I won't be there for this party.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think we need more creative ways of helping people, as you said, ease into the topic and not feel so confronted by the reality of our mortality.
Absolutely. And you talk about somebody being comfortable picking a song for, their celebration of life or whatever. But there's also you know, it feels like maybe that is an easier thing to do, but not to take away from the fact that that is a very helpful thing for the people who will be mourning you when somebody dies, and exactly the sort of thing that they would want in order to be celebrated. Maybe they want everybody to be wearing black, or they want absolutely nobody to be wearing black, or they want to have particular favorite food or the music or whatever. Is just, that's such a gift that you give to the people you're leaving behind, because then they don't, again, I go back to that same idea of like just being able to be in their grief and not make decisions about these sorts of things can really really be powerful.
That's so true. And I think about in my own experience when my mother died when she was 89, but she left behind a little notebook for my brother and I with all of her plans for her funeral, including the music and where she wanted it to be held. She had chosen, this was like a heartbreaking thing. She had chosen speakers that she would like to have speak at her funeral. But over the years, because she planned it 5 years before she died, some of them had a line drawn through their name, and she wrote deceased next to their name. And it was sad because they were friends of hers who preceded her in death. And it made me really realize, wow, at a certain age, you experience a lot of death of all the people that you've known and cared about, and what a burden that became for her, in a way that she was carrying just so much grief in those last years. And I didn't even realize it till I saw her little notebook. But I will say it, I will echo what you said. It was the best gift she ever could have given us, because if my brother and I had had to plan the funeral, we would have argued for days about what to do, who should speak, what songs should we have. We would not have been able to agree on anything. And she saved us all that misery.
So
Absolutely.
much of these things is our gifts, and we say that all of the time. And it's for exactly that reason, right? It just saves the family potential strife, and everybody's stressed out. Nobody's going to be their best selves in these conversations. So just having a playbook is just a gift, and we try to use that as much as we can as encouragement for people to do it, as motivation, because it isn't always the most exciting or joyful or fun task to do, to think of these things and to do the organization. But it's for your family, it's for your kids, it's your spouse.
Yeah. And I'll say for my brother and I, it allowed us to be on the same team, actually, because we're
Hmm.
on team mom now, creating the funeral she asked for, what she wanted. We could both get behind it and support everything she wanted. And it wasn't about us and what we each wanted. So we could work together. And that was amazing. It was amazing that we had that opportunity to come together to make her dream a reality and create that.
Yeah, that's really special. That's awesome.
So, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the barriers for people, because I'm sure you have encountered those as well around end of life planning. And one is just in general our society's discomfort with even facing the reality that we will die one day. But I thought maybe the two of you could talk about that. What you see as the biggest barriers.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on a little bit before, but the fear, right? The fear and the anxiety around the discussion, because we're not comfortable in the space. We're not, most people haven't had enough one-on-one experience. You know, they haven't had conversations with people, and they just don't feel comfortable. And it's very fearful. I mean, most people, understandably so, are fearful of their death or their loved one's death. And that is completely understandable. And we certainly don't make light of that at all when we're talking about this. But the idea of just giving people a a space where they can get just ever so slightly more. They might not want to walk into a party and talk about it, but if they don't wince the next time something about this topic gets brought up, then we feel like that's a win for us. So yes, fear is a big one and probably the number one. And then the other, when talking about, trying to, um, you know, get people to come to the workshops and do this planning ahead of time, when it's not imminent, there is a big, sort of lack of urgency, right? Like, I'm healthy, I've got many years of life left to go. I don't need to do this. It's a time commitment. I just don't want to, I don't want to put the time in to do it. And, while of course we all hope that that's true, especially for those people who are coming to us in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, that you still have some time left. But, unfortunately, things can change in an instant. And whether it be a diagnosis or something, something horrible like a car accident, we just never know. And having these conversations and making these plans and doing this sort of stuff when there isn't this sort of, I am looking at a terminal diagnosis and I now know that I have, we all have a finite amount of time left on earth. But when we're given a truly, oh gosh, it's 6 months or it's a year, it changes the way we look at things. And then having to have these conversations just gets a heaviness that it may not have had before. And so that's again something that we try and get out ahead of by having people tackle these things when they are healthy. But just not it. There's a lot of items on the to-do list that, that surpass this because there isn't the urgency for it in most people's minds. So those are two big barriers for us for sure.
Yeah. And we try to do a lot in the workshops to for both of those things. I mean, with the part about fear, we do kind of, move back and forth between having people share stories or experiences, that can be a little bit I mean, they're really meaningful for everybody to hear and to learn from, but and can, be a little bit harder. Sometimes, it's just like dealing with the complexities of death and dealing with somebody who's dying. And then we also kind of move into, like, as I said, like the real tangible things. So we kind of try to go back and forth, and we've gotten some really good feedback about how that balance is really helpful for people because it allows them to, both face some of the hard things, but also feel like they're accomplishing something for themselves and kind of over time, like I said, chip away at that fear and discomfort. Um, and with the urgency piece, the other thing, like we talked about in the beginning, is people are seeing it a lot more with their folks. Oftentimes, for the folks that are coming, the people who are coming to our workshops often have parents who are still alive. And we've had some really special experiences where people come with their parents. So we have, we had in our first workshop a woman who came with her mom, and then so they were able to, both like learn things about each other through the sharing that they had not learned, but then it also gives everybody the same language and the same thing that's not about like, I'm making you do this or I'm really forcing you to talk about it. But we talked about this in class today. There's like another kind of, it's just like more support because they can kind of coming at it from the same place. And when you were talking about your mom and, seeing so much loss as she gets older, it made me think about, the mom in that class was actually a little bit more comfortable talking about death because she had experienced it more so than the folks that, more so than the people who were still in their 50s. She was just like, this is becoming a little bit familiar to me, and her friends are talking about it more. And that was really interesting for us to hear about and learn, and great to hear about in the workshop environment because other people could learn from that and hear about how things did get easier as far as like just wrapping your head around it as you age because it does feel more present. But I think that the ability to give people the space to ask questions, bring up things that they can't bring up with their spouse or their friends because everybody's uncomfortable with it. But like, here's the place. Like, share your weird story or concern, or hear about something that somebody else has gone through and ask questions about that. I think is what makes doing this in a group like to be actually really powerful and in a way that we maybe didn't even think about. We were just like, let's do a workshop because that'll be a way to talk to a bunch of people at once. And then we quickly saw the power of people doing it together, the accountability, the stories, the just like richness of being together and facing this together. Even if in the beginning of the group class they were strangers, they're not at the end. And that's been a really cool thing to be a part of.
I love that idea. First, I love the idea of a multi-generational workshop, and that's amazing whenever that could happen. But I think you're so right. This power of coming together when we realize this isn't just something that's going to happen to me one day. It's going to happen to everyone one day, and I'm not alone. And so we can come together and support each other as we're looking ahead and making our plans. And I think you're right. I think the workshop is a really beautiful way to teach that.
Yeah.
And I know, well, I don't know, Jen, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
No, no, not really.
Okay.
The only thing I would add is like in the more even more recent workshop we truly had a participant in her early 30s all the way up to a participant in their mid 80s. And that multi-generational view of things was absolutely fascinating. And like we couldn't have planned, like Karen said, like we didn't even, we couldn't have planned it better. And I think just the richness that came from not only the young side of things, without as much loss in life, all the way up to, somebody in their 80s. It's just, it really is. I mean, not to overuse the word powerful, but it was very powerful.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that. Well, I know for myself, just personally, in spite of the fact that I know the importance of doing this paperwork and the end of life planning, I know all about it as I've been talking about it and studying it for years. It's still actually very daunting to sit down and try to figure out, where do I begin? What's the most important thing for me to start with? And how do I get everything organized? And I find myself, I keep putting it off and avoiding it a little bit because it's such a big task. But one thing I loved that I read on your website is this idea of, if nothing else, like little ideas to help people get started. And I realized that's probably actually what I need. I need to start very small and start with something little just to get the process going.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, again, going back to the workshop, we have a workbook that participants fill out, and so at the end of the four sessions, they have a very tangible piece. Kind of this we'll call, the one portion of it is truly called the life file, but then all of these other elements are all part of this workshop, or excuse me, the workbook. Um, but yes, the sort of, if nothing else, very small, bite-sized, tangible bits of each section. The first being the life file, which is the folder, the document you're talking about, where you would have all the important information, passwords, and that sort of stuff. Account account numbers and people to contact, etc. But the smallest, most bite size, if nothing else, is just writing down the passwords to your devices.
Mm.
So your computer, your phone, your tablet, whatever those are, that is the very first thing most people need to get into, then search for these other things. And you wouldn't believe how often people don't even know, whether it's their spouse or, certainly if it's an aging parent, they often don't know how to even open up the computer. And if you can't do that, then it is a real struggle. And so that's kind of our first, if nothing else, just make sure you have the passwords to the devices. And usually, it's phone, tablet, computer. Those are the three things. And then they at least have somewhere to start to search for things if you haven't supplied them with anything else. So
Mm. I love that.
that's sort of the first thing. And then just to continue on this, again, just the bite-size pieces is the other element of the celebration. And like you told the story about your mother who just gave you a complete playbook. And I mean, that was amazing. And it sounds like it really came to fruition to being a gift for you and your brother the way it should be. But for other people who don't put that much time and effort into something like that, if you can just tell somebody what one thing is that you want, like I mentioned earlier, like you definitely do not want this to be a somber event, so please nobody wear black. And even just knowing that, you could probably kind of roll with it, and and do something that would be in line with the deceased person's wishes. So just anything, any small little, I want music to be played and I'd like it to be, 1980s,
Mhm.
whatever it is. Just sharing one tiny little thing is really, really helpful.
Jen's saying that for a friend. She definitely wants a 1980s
Yeah.
funeral. We know. Okay. So hint. Yeah. So we do these. The workshop is four sections. We kind of cover these four pieces, right? So there's the life file, the celebration, and then the last two are the body disposition and the advance directive. So for the body disposition, we say the if nothing else is just document what you want done with your body. It is the first decision that your family members are going to have to make, and to have that, it's fairly time sensitive, right? Something needs to happen fairly soon. So it's just relief. It's just a gift to do the thing that they know that you wanted. Um, and in some ways, there's so many different things now that you can have done with your body beyond just being buried or cremated. And so maybe there's something that you want that feels more aligned with your values and is not something that anyone in your family has done before. So even more important to them, make that decision ahead of time and write it down. So there's not one person who says one thing and one person who says another. And then we save the advance directive kind of for last because there's nothing small about that piece of it. I'm sure all of your listeners know what the advance directive is, but it's a very critical document that covers who you're going to want making decisions for you at the end of your life if you cannot make those decisions yourself, and what care or treatment you may or may not want. And there's obviously so much nuance and different scenarios that could be happening that somebody's going to need to make those decisions. So what we always say is for the, if nothing else around that, is to, have conversations with your loved ones beforehand about what quality of life means for you. Of course, it is great to have that document completed. That is like the goal. But if nothing else, having them being able to just feel confident that they know what was important to you. And if there's decisions about treatment that are going to impede what you think of is your quality of life, that they know how to make those, they can make those decisions. Because it's always a very hard and stressful and horrible time if you're in that position. There's a lot of times when somebody might not need to even use an advance directive, right? They can make their own decisions. But if putting it in the hands of somebody else, it's stressful for everybody. And knowing what you would have wanted is the biggest gift in that situation. And I had a situation within my family when my mom got sick really suddenly. As I mentioned, she kind of what felt like out of the blue was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. She started treatment and she got an infection pretty early on after her first round of chemo. So we were in the total chaos of like, I can't believe this is happening. And then things were just escalating. Over the course of several days, she had to get admitted back to the hospital. She had to go to the ICU. Eventually, as some of you who have been in this position are familiar with, the doctor pulled my sister and I aside and said, we have to make a decision. We can move forward with treatment. The next thing will be fairly invasive and will probably not work. And if it does work, the recovery will be really difficult. Or we stop treatment. And my sister and I, we didn't have the document in front of us. We didn't have a thing to read off of to make the decision, but we both knew because we'd had enough conversations with her and we knew what she would have wanted. And she would not have wanted to be put in that position of a really hard recovery while still having to deal with the fact that she had stage 4 metastatic cancer. So we were able to make that decision. It was, again, the most horrible time sitting in that room, but we both felt confident and clear and agreed that we were doing what she wanted. And that, I think back on that time as like such a pivotal moment for our family because it could have gone in so many different horrible ways if we would have not agreed or not seen eye to eye. And I think that's why, we always come back to like, it's the conversations, it's the confidence, it's giving your people, like giving your loved ones a real sense that they know you, which is really best done through talking. So that's our very kind of like heavy, if nothing else, around the advance directive is to talk about these things and to talk about what quality of life means for you.
That's so true and so important. And I was thinking about how much it's helpful with grief later after a loved one dies. If I know what my mom wanted, I helped carry that out. And it takes away some of the questions that you ask in your own mind, like, did I do the right thing? Did I make the right decision? Is that really what she would have wanted? When you have that assurance that we talked about it and I know what she wanted and we followed what she wanted, that can change everything in the grieving process later.
For sure. And also to be able to kind of like separate a little bit to know like this might not be what I want. I want my mom to live forever, but like to have been through it a little bit more and process it in our brain to be able to step aside and say this is what she wants. And I think that's so hard to do if you're thinking about this for the first time in the moment because you're just in a total panic. So, that's why we want people to be talking about this, when they're not in a time of panic and not in a time of crisis.
Yes, exactly. Well, one issue that I've been observing recently are there are so many people in my age group. Some are solo agers, they don't have a partner, haven't had for years, and many don't have children. And they're struggling a little bit with how do I name a healthcare proxy? Who do I find who would take on that responsibility and be there for me and show up? And there are really a lot of people struggling a little bit and feeling like, I don't know if I have someone close enough to me who would actually carry that out and carry out my wishes. And I wondered, in your work, how do you help advise people on that, on choosing the best healthcare proxy and who it should be?
Yeah, we do an exercise in the workshop with folks to kind of think through what are the important characteristics of that person, So we found a really great kind of guide of questions. I think it was from the Mayo Foundation actually that gives you kind of guidelines about like what you need from that person. Do they know me well? Is it somebody that I can easily talk with about my healthcare goals? Um, like I was saying, will they honor my wishes even if they don't agree with them? And are they able to speak up for what I want if there's other people around who may have, conflicting opinions about things? Um, can they make hard life and death decisions? Will they be available? Will they be able to be, called and close by and able to respond to things? So there's like a bunch of, these kind of questions. So you can kind of think about some of the close people in your life and who of those answers affirmatively to most of them. And I think that can really help you narrow down who those person might be. It might not be the person closest to you because that person, I mean, this we kind of talk about all the time too. Like if you feel really strongly that you will not want life-sustaining treatment, but your spouse is not going to be able to make that call in the moment, maybe they shouldn't be your healthcare proxy. And helping them understand that and helping the person who is going to do that understand their role. One of the other things that we come up to is when people have 3 or 4 kids, how do they decide who should that person be? And we talk about how designating one person is actually pretty important. Not that everybody else can't be talking to each other and supporting each other and playing a part in the decision, but ultimately having one person who is the one who really can do those things, can really speak for you and not just like what one of the siblings wants, and have everybody understand that that's the person who ultimately is going to make the decision. And we're going to be okay with that. But, it's a different challenge than the one that you talked about, but it's the rules are the same, right? Finding the person who's going to be able to best support your wishes, not theirs, not everybody else's. It's hard. It's a hard question on
It
all
is a hard
sides.
one. Yeah, and I'll just tack onto that the idea that I understand, especially when people are like you say, they're solo agers and they don't have a spouse or maybe they don't have children, and thinking about that person is hard. But also, I think that in you know, I can't speak for everybody, but as you age, if you are in a community and you are able to have these, it kind of always all goes back to just the comfort level of being able to talk about the fact that we are aging and we will die. And maybe the person that you do choose for this role, like Karen said, isn't the closest person to you, but it's somebody that knows you and agrees with your understanding of what you would like at the end and is able to carry that out for you. And if we can all be more comfortable talking about this in our communities and maybe in retirement homes or whatever that might be, then you might find that unlikely person there, right? And they may not be the first person that comes to mind, but you might connect with somebody in that way. And it again, just going back to, the comfort of talking about aging and mortality and getting to
Yeah,
that space.
I think that's a really good point that's when, if we don't have family available that could play that role, or some of us, we have family, but they may not be people who are able to carry out the role, that we need to turn to our communities. And I don't know, is that something, do you offer, if someone came to you and said, I've been asked to be a healthcare proxy, do you offer any consultation for those people about how to be a good healthcare proxy, or do you do any kind of education around that?
That's an interesting question. We haven't ever been posed that question. I think we absolutely could offer support in that area, definitely. It hasn't happened yet, but I think we could definitely offer guidance to somebody, who if they were put in that role.
Because I think as while we're all looking at, I need to advocate for myself, I need to do my own advanced care planning, we should all assume at some point we're going to be asked to help someone else. We're going to be asked to make decisions possibly for someone else in our lives, so that simultaneously we all need to be learning how to advocate for another person as well as ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's see. Sorry. Oh, one thing I saw on your website that I was really interested in is that you talk a bit about using the idea of Swedish death cleaning to help people organize, because I think that's another really important thing. It was with my mom, at least, a whole house full of stuff and trying to figure out who wants this or where should it go and what did she want to have happen with her things. So I was curious about how you help people with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the idea, I don't know if you've read the book or heard of the book, The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. But that book, I think, kind of brought this concept to the forefront, especially in the United States. But it is truly Swedish death cleaning is a practice that in Sweden, if you subscribe to this, you really do it throughout your life. It's almost like spring cleaning. You are consistently ridding yourself of clutter and eliminating unnecessary items. I mean, it's something that I think we all could be way better at, especially when we live in these big homes and there's just places to put things. And we tend to not do the decluttering unless we move, right? But this intention is to do that on a regular basis, right? And not just be bogged down with clutter. The way I help people, if somebody comes to me and, again, is at the end of life, needing support with this sort of thing. Maybe they're even just downsizing and they're not actually truly at the end of life, but they are moving into a retirement community and they'll be in a one-bedroom apartment, moving from, the big home they raised their kids in. And my goal with that in helping them is to find the things. Of course, there's the step of just, what can you donate? What is truly just to be gotten rid of? But then those elements that have meaning, have sentimental value, are part of the legacy of who you are and the life you lived. Have those conversations and tell those stories with people before you die, so that that item that you want to leave to them has so much more meaning and they can carry on knowing what that meant to you and what all those stories were, from the time that you lived and had that item in your life. And it's really unbelievable, you know, even photographs sometimes, like, the old photo albums where your grandkids are going to have no idea who the people are in the pictures, writing stories and, at minimum, writing down names and, what relations are, but just telling the stories so that there's so much more life brought to the photos, the items, whatever they might be. It just it gives the person who then carries that on, um, a bigger piece of you, for lack of a better word. It just becomes that much more meaningful. And it's nice again then for the person who is tasked with emptying out the house to not just have rooms full of clutter. And, I don't want to call it all clutter because it's not, but there's plenty of that as well. And to just have that done before you're gone. And there's always questions inevitably too, right? Like maybe you start to tell a story and then your child or your grandchild has all kinds of questions that they want to know. And if this happens and they're going through your things after you've died, there's nobody to answer those questions. So it's very cathartic, I think, on both sides, right? Both for the person who is aging and dying and for the people that they are passing the items down to.
Oh, I really love that idea. And again, another thing, a little bit daunting, but
Definitely daunting, no question. But, again, well, I'll go back to the, starting small and, like you start with one room or you start with, one set of books or, just don't feel like you have to tackle it all at once. And, you just give yourself the time and the space to do pieces of it at a time. And then it all does become that much more manageable.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
Um, well, I was wondering if you'd want to tell us anything more about workshops you have coming up or any other services that you have provided. And I know you're coming out with a workbook, I believe.
Yeah. So, okay, Karen, I'll just talk a little bit about other services real quick, just from like a one-on-one doula perspective. Obviously the education and the workshop part of it is a huge piece of what we do. But also I provide one-on-one support to, sometimes I'm hired to support the family of the person who is sick and or dying. And then other times it's support for the person who is actually dying themselves. And it really does run the gamut. When I said earlier, I really just felt so in my element the first time I was doing this and kind of, calling in hospice and making sure, that things were all organized for my uncle. The duties, I should say, really are so wide range. And it is often just the extra set of hands and support that somebody can provide is just really invaluable to the person when they're in this space. And having somebody that's comfortable, with a sick or dying person, can just, not everybody is comfortable in this space. And so being able to provide that is really wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Karen, I'll let you talk about the workbook and the workshops.
Yeah. So we've mentioned the workshops. Our
Mhm.
kind of like foundational workshop is peace of mind planning. So that's the 4-part series, and we do it on Zoom in a pretty small group, anywhere between probably 8 and 12 people, and it's an hour each session. So people will cover a topic, and then there'll be homework, so people can actually kind of work through and get these tasks done. So you can finish the workshop with, pretty comprehensive, what we call like a death plan, like all of these things beyond just your will and your financial plan, but all these other decisions. And then we use a lot of the time when we're together to have the conversations, to kind of work through some of the values that might be guiding your decisions. And we spend a good bit of time too talking about having these conversations with other people as well. We've also, we're going to have that workshop run again in the spring, so in March of 2026. Also, around the same time, we will run a workshop that's called Caring Now, Planning Ahead, which is a little bit more of kind of, we call like half education, half support group. So this is geared towards people who are really in it with supporting and, either, in elder care with their aging parents or older loved ones or any kind of person who they are caring for at the end of life. So we'll spend some time, as a group talking about some of those challenges and sharing with each other and being a support to one another while also making, helping people understand the different end of life preparation that they want to be thinking about to support this person and of course themselves. So that one's a little bit of a different setup, and meant to be kind of more of a support group for part of it. So both of those we will run in the spring. And just another side note is that we have started doing kind of what we call like a 101 version of peace of mind planning, just an hour-long session in corporate workspaces. So we'll go into companies and offer them as like a lunch and learn, or come in through a caregiving employee resource group. And it's just for companies who want to offer their employees a little bit more of a holistic support around these types of issues. We will come in and kind of do an hour-long conversation about that. And those have been really well attended. I think people are, hungry to learn about some of these things, and they're grateful for their companies to be kind of offering this type of thing. And then, like Jen mentioned, the workbook. So we have a workbook that if you attend the class, you go through, but we're also creating kind of a standalone thing. So if workshops are not your thing, if it feels too daunting to be going through this with somebody else or other people, or you just can't commit the time to attending something, once every other week, we're going to be producing a kind of a book that you can work through yourself. So these are the types of things that you would learn, and then this is the activities to do it. So that we expect to be out next year, and we'll offer it on the website. And I think, it's one of those things too that might be helpful as a way to initiate conversations with people, because it's just something to be like, I just purchased this online. Maybe you might want to take a look at it, and you can just leave it on the coffee table. And so it's another format that we want to offer people as a way to, again, just like to getting back to the mission, just starting to normalize these conversations.
I love that idea of the coffee table book, that someone
Subtle.
will be curious about it. Well,
Yeah.
I'll remind listeners that I'm talking with Jen Tadjedin and Karen Callahan of the Heartwood Collective, and the website is theheartwoodcollective.com. And I just want to thank both of you for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's been lovely to chat with you.
I look forward to staying in touch and hearing more about what you're doing there in Portland. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.